Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and today on Happy's Thoughts, I want to do a game review. I've been thinking about doing this video, but I was almost too embarrassed to say the things I need to say to give you the context to understand my perspective. So, today on Happy's Thoughts, I am going to talk about my first ever time playing through one of the most classic and most requested RPGs on this channel, Chrono Trigger. That's right, and one of the main holdups with me doing this video was that I was too embarrassed to admit I had never played it before. As somebody who loves the Final Fantasy series and the Square Enix series, it seems like a cardinal sin to have not played at least Chrono Trigger. And the reason why I never played it, simply put, growing up, my NES, my SNES, they were hand-me-downs. But whatever I got on those are what I had. Or whatever a friend had that I could borrow. By the time I was like 5 years old, the N64 was out, and the PlayStation, and from that point on, that became what my childhood gaming consoles were. Now, that's not to say that Chrono Trigger wasn't available to me. I actually own the PlayStation 1 version of Chrono Trigger, and that's my only experience with it. And it sucks, because the PlayStation 1 version is just... it sucks. I can't really think of a better way to say it. The Final Fantasy IV also comes on that. That one also sucks, so don't play either one of those versions of Chrono Trigger or Final Fantasy IV. So for New Year's Eve, I decided to finally spend some time playing Chrono Trigger. Specifically, I was playing the DS version. It's a re-release that came out a few years ago at this point, and I streamed it using my 3DS. If you haven't been following the channel for years now, you wouldn't know this, but I do have a capture board installed in my 3DS. I used it for Pokemon, I used it for Final Fantasy Explorers, and I've used it for a few things here and there. But because this was on the DS, only physically, I decided to buy it off Amazon, get it shipped in like 2 days for like 20-25 bucks. And let me just say that TLDR, it is indeed one of the best RPGs I have ever played. To no one's surprise who's really played it before. So, 27 years old, what do I think about Chrono Trigger? Like, why do I think, after now having played the DS version, that it is one of the best RPGs of all time? Well, first of all, I want to say the DS version, I've seen people play the original Chrono Trigger. In fact, I watched a friend do a challenge recently where he had to only use 3 characters the entire game, and it was, first of all, it looks loyal to the original version. It's not one of those remakes where they decided to kind of get fancy with it or maybe try 3D graphics or stuff like that. The only thing the DS version really has that's different, I guess, is the anime scenes. It even gives you the options to use the old school menu system that Chrono Trigger had. I didn't decide to use it. I decided to use the new DS version, but all the same, it's incredibly loyal to the base game from what I've seen of other gameplay, on top of just having some extra things to make it potentially more enjoyable. So first, without saying too much, I'll talk about the story. It's a classic RPG story, but it's one of the classic RPG stories that takes on one of the most difficult topics of all time, or one of the most difficult things to do in a video game, in time travel. Chrono Trigger is a term that is used in the game, and Chrono, of course, being a term for time and also the name of the primary character himself. There's a lot of things that can go wrong when you do a time travel-based game. However, I feel like this one hit the nail on the head. I mean, between NPCs just having subtle tells of where you need to go next in the game without needing to point you in a direction, it was definitely a great homage to the old school RPGs without feeling like there was too much unnecessary information being given to me. Sometimes they just made multiple characters say similar things, like to really nail it home to you that it was important. And there's very key words you could look out for with it being a time travel game, such as, we'll be able to do this eventually. You know, that means that they probably won't do it while they're on screen. So what do? You time travel. You go forward in time, and you'll probably, you know, that'll probably be the solution to your problem. Or, oh, that thing doesn't exist anymore, but guess what? It may have existed in the past. Subtle tells like that made the time travel not gimmicky at all. It made it super enjoyable to figure out where you need to be and why. And how the story evolves based on your actions is incredibly satisfying. It was just so well put together that I don't know how anyone can fault it, other than there's probably some time-related loopholes, and there's some leniencies you have to give it because it's not trying to be like too literal. It almost tries to be satirical in a sense when it comes to explaining how certain characters know certain things and how they've changed in a sense. But it's great the whole way through, and I loved it. The combat is the other thing. It's an ATB style game where position of your characters matters. You don't have any control over the position of your characters. However, understanding the battles and where your characters are allows you to make the proper use of each and every one of your abilities. Even just in random battles, sometimes waiting for the enemies to wander together close enough to hit them both with an attack at the same time means that waiting around isn't always the best feeling thing to do, but sometimes you just can't help but, instead of wanting to speed through a battle, just see if you can like land hits on multiple enemies at once. It's basically just almost an uncontrollable field-based, turn-based combat. If anyone's played the more recent I Am Setsuna, which was modeled after Chrono Trigger's battle system, it's like that but better. The visuals are much more satisfying. The effect of landing hits on enemies, of figuring out weaknesses, of comboing characters together to do special techniques, it's all very satisfying, and it almost makes you forget you're playing a game that at its core is turn-based. It may be ATB, an ATB style of turn-based, but it is still turn-based, and it's one of the most satisfying turn-based combat systems, or ATB combat systems I've ever played. Diving into the difficulty, people always kind of wonder about RPGs and, you know, was it hard? Was it challenging? The way I play RPGs is I just kill every single thing I run across. And so most RPGs aren't really a challenge if you do that. If you play like a D&D style RPG or like something like Dark Souls, you will still run into an issue of enemies being difficult. You know, you may desire to go back and find ways to get stronger or a different way to approach a solution. Here, it's pretty straightforward, and if you keep just killing enemies that are in your way instead of trying to avoid them actively, then you'll probably not feel like there's an incredible amount of challenge. The only time that it really felt that way is when you go out of your way to do certain side quests, maybe before you were expecting enemies to be a certain strength, or maybe you just weren't supposed to be there yet. You were taking some liberties on where you were deciding to explore. But you learn very quickly. You don't feel bad for going out of your way, and it gives you something that you go, you know what, I'll come back in a few levels, and I'll be a little bit more prepared next time. So it's a good balance of exploration, learning where you're supposed to be, learning where you're not supposed to be, and still progressing through the game slowly. Enemies aren't a pushover, but you eventually get a rhythm to a degree where even the bosses that are supposed to be threatening to you don't necessarily come off as such. I think the game maybe feeds us a little bit too much in the item category. I found myself finding way more items than I could ever feasibly need, so much so that I almost never use my money for anything except purchasing an upgrade item from a shop. But that being said, I could say that most RPGs do that, and then I mostly neglect using items until the end of the game anyway. So I feel like that's more on me and less on the game just pushing items on me. I just kind of hoard them and try to get by with the bare minimum in the first place. So then when I finally do start using them, I go, why do I have so many of these? But wasn't super challenging, but that's just because of the way I approach RPGs, I suppose. Now, because it's the DS version, I do want to very quickly touch on there's bonus content in the DS version that isn't in the original version. There's a new dungeon called the Lost Sanctum, and there's 3 optional dungeons called Dimensional Vortexes, which I don't think is the proper plural, but whatever. So I'll touch on those real quick. The Dimensional Vortex, all 3 of them, those weren't that bad. They're pretty short, they're bite-sized in a sense, and they come with a reasonable reward at the end, and some rewards within the dungeons themselves. It didn't feel too bad going through those. They didn't really feel like they added much to the game, because the game allows you to go all the way up to 99, and unless there's something in New Game Plus that I haven't seen, I don't see really a reason for this game to let you go to 99. By level 45, 50, you've pretty much already out-leveled almost everything in the game. Especially if you're using items that just bump your stats naturally, or you've gotten some decent armor and accessories, which there's incredibly overpowered armor and accessories. There's several pieces that just straight up allow you to ignore all status ailments, which I guess is fine, but it made it feel like I really didn't need to go past level 50. Like, the game could have stopped at level 50 and then kept a modicum of the difficulty in these optional dungeons, but instead I'm level 66, gaining experience points I don't really feel like I need, to a level cap that I don't feel like I really ever want to reach. There's nothing in the, I don't think there's anything in the Lost Sanctum either that is going to push me to that level, or at least it feels that way having gone through just the beginning of it. So the 3 Dimensional Vortex I said are fine, they're bite-sized. The Lost Sanctum's on the other end of the spectrum. The Lost Sanctum is a 2-sided dungeon. It takes place in 2 separate time periods, and you're constantly traveling back and forth between those 2 time periods to accomplish the goals of the inhabitants of the village inside of the Sanctum itself. It seems like a really good concept, and it sounds like it should play very well off of the rest of the game in the way that actually, the time travel actually affected the rest of the game. But because there's only 2 possible destinations, it's very clear when you walk into a room and you go, well, I'm clearly not supposed to be here right now. I either have to do something else or I need to go into the other time frame in order to get this done. It makes it so it's almost just like you got to stop, you got to backtrack, you got to leave, you got to go out, you got to go to the other time. Maybe there's still something you need to do there. The constant backtracking out of the dungeon and without a quicker means to do so, at least to the point where I've reached yet. And on top of that, the fact that it just doesn't, it's not very satisfying because, again, I don't find any enemies really presenting me with any real challenge, and I've been in this dungeon since before level 60, and now I'm over level 60, and I'm gaining levels, but I don't know why, because these enemies are not pushing the characters, despite it being a new optional dungeon for a game that goes up to 99. And on top of that, just the design, the tedium, without a guide, really doing the Lost Sanctum, nothing feels good about it. It feels like it wants to make use of what Chrono Trigger is good at, but it doesn't make use of what it's good at well enough. For that reason, I wouldn't blame anybody for just straight up not liking the optional content that it has to have. The good news is that the base game, everything before the DS content is there and it's intact and it's functional and it's good. If you just remember that and you just want to play through that and just ignore the optional side stuff, I wouldn't blame you, because I honestly just lost interest in the Lost Sanctum, like, probably not even like a 10th of the way through. I was like, alright, this is so uninteresting compared to every other narrative in the game. It's just some village, and it's just here for what feels like no reason. So that's my only criticism, but I'm not going to lay that criticism towards Chrono Trigger itself. Just as optional content separated from the main game, it was super unsatisfying. That being said, the other side quests, the ones that are in the base game, are phenomenal. They are good at providing backstory to each of the character. Even those have some permanent choices that you can make, that you may want to reset your game a few times if you didn't get it right the first time. And they're good. They're world building, they're fun, they make good use of the time travel. They do everything the DS optional content doesn't. And these are side quests that'll get you the best sword in the game for Chrono, or some of the best accessories, and you may have some permanent choices that you'll want to Google before you actually go into those things. And those are satisfying, just not the optional stuff that's DS exclusive. So overall, if somebody tells you that Chrono Trigger is one of the best RPGs ever made, and you say you love RPGs and you've never played it, and you're like me before the last few days, do it. Make a conscious effort to go out, play Chrono Trigger. If you're a fan of RPGs, there's no reason not to. I'm insulted with myself that I waited this long to play it, and now I know why. People are asking me if I will play the sequel, Chrono Cross, and then when I use the word sequel, some of you are putting in the comment section right now for me to shut my mouth. It wasn't a real sequel. I haven't decided yet if I'll play Chrono Cross, only because I don't know that I'm ready to deal with the constant comments during my Twitch live stream about how it's not a, quote, real sequel to Chrono Trigger. I already know the basis of what happens in Chrono Cross. I had to know why everyone who was huge fans of Chrono Trigger kept telling me how much they despised it. From what I can tell, it sounds like something that you should kind of absorb it almost differently from Chrono Trigger, even though it is tied in. And at the same time, just try to enjoy it as its own game and try not to affiliate it with Chrono Trigger at all. So if I can do it under that pretense, I may line up Chrono Cross and try that as well, but I haven't decided yet, so that's yet to be seen. And that's going to be a wrap for my Happy's Thoughts. I really just wanted to make a video talking about how awesome Chrono Trigger was, and that's what Happy's Thoughts is for. If I'm thinking about something, I do it. If you want to hear what I think about some of the other old RPGs, or if there's RPGs I haven't gotten to yet, and you think I should get to them, I know Legend of Dragoon is one I haven't played through, another one you guys will probably hate me for, but yeah, maybe it's time that I just start reviewing old school RPGs and letting you guys know what I think about them. So let me know in the comment section of the video below. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and check out Chrono Trigger if you haven't, because it's really, really, really good. So thank you everyone for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, take care.